to record. So
Okay, cool.
I might pause the recording.
All right. So I appreciate everybody's being here today. I just wanted to talk about something that's, to me, a pretty important thing because it has to do with people's money, people's property, and people trying to get it without giving anything. And as a sworn officer of the court, that really bothers me. So for those of you who I haven't met, and I think I've met pretty much everyone on the call, but except for iPhone, I don't know who that is, but that's okay. Maybe I'm Nick Lovelace. I'm the attorney with NIP Law Office, and I practice in our Kannapolis office as well as our Concord office. I manage both. Like I said, I know most of you. We've done closings for pretty much all of you, and really appreciate you giving us some time to talk about the more and more prevalent real estate scamming, fraud, etc., that we're seeing here in the industry recently. And we don't want y'all to get in trouble, and we don't want to get in trouble. And so because of that, we want to share, I want to share some strategies with you about what you can do to basically avoid being that person who has to make that call to their E&O and say, hey, yeah, somebody used me to get 20, 30, 50, $100,000 out of this property, and it turns out they don't own it. And so there's some ways that you can work against folks doing that. And so what I want to do is go through kind of what those things are. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Give me 1 second. All right, so everybody should have the presentation now on the screen. I think it would look like that.
It looks like this.
Okay, perfect. I don't want it to look like that. I want it to look like, let's see. Okay, we're getting there. I think I want to share something different. Let's see. We share. Let's try this. Let's show something different. Let's Zoom quit unexpectedly. I don't know. All right, perfect. Yep. All right, so that is what I want my screen to look like. That looks better. So basically, it's just about people trying to get money and get it in an undeserved fashion for because they don't own property. They don't own. Technology is a wonderful thing. All right, so we are back, and if anybody has any questions about anything during the presentation, I will be glad to answer it for you. I will be happy to do whatever. And obviously, I think we're recording this, so this will also be shared during the course of the after the presentation. So let me see. And is my screen still sharing, or do I need to reshare?
It looks like that.
Okay, perfect. All right, so basically I call this money for nothing. People who don't have land, who are trying to sell land, people who aren't entitled to money, trying to get money. There are a lot of different ways that they can do it, so we're going to try and prevent it. So this is a list of some of the scams. This is not an exhaustive list. Unfortunately, people are scheming and trying to do different things all the time to try to find different and innovative ways to get money in an ill-gotten way out of your clients, out of the community at large. So we're trying to stop that because we don't like that. That's bad, because the more people that get money for nothing, the less trust that people have in their community, and you certainly don't want to have your name attached to any sort of transaction that involves anything like that. So you've got what I call the FSNBO scam. It's not as FSNBO. I don't know how you would say it because it's not as easily said as FSBO, but it's basically for sale, not by the owner. You've got fake listing scams. You've got fake seller due diligence scams, fake wiring instructions, and the last one's not, I don't know if it's a scam. I think it is, but there are people who do it. If there's anyone on this call who does it, I apologize in advance. I just don't like it. And so I will kind of let you know what I think about that. So first off, I'm just going to start with kind of what the details are on this scam, and then what you can potentially do to avoid these sorts of scams. You're going to see some common themes across each of these different options. So first off, you've got your for sale, not by owner scam. Basically what that is, you've got a seller who is not actually the owner of the property. They'll put a sign in a lot with a number that is not the number of the person who owns the property. And then an agent or a buyer will contact the seller, go under contract. They might deliver due diligence. It might get to closing. If it gets to closing, then there is the possibility of that seller receiving a pretty considerable amount of ill-gotten funds. So what has happened in the past is, yeah, people will just put a sign out in the yard. And if you see that sign out in the yard and you have a client who may be interested in buying property like that, first thing people are going to do is call that number. Hey, what's going on? What's the story with this property? The sign number one, and I'm not saying anything about people who are selling from out of state, people who are selling from out of the country, but if you see someone out of state and out of the country, should at least set off some sort of alarm bell for you. So you'll want to verify the name of the person you're talking to. And my suggestion is to go ahead and get that parcel number as well. Get the parcel ID, get the parcel information. Go ahead and look it up on the GIS to see who the registered owner of the property is. And because a lot of times that registered owner of the property is not going to be, if someone's pulling the scam, they're not going to be the same person. So you're going to want to request to see some identification, and you can either request a emailed copy to you. You can request a face-to-face Zoom meeting. And so there are a lot of different ways you can use to try and identify, okay, this is the person that actually is selling the property, and this is the person who I'm actually communicating with. Because what these folks will do is they'll pose as the person who owns the property. And when they pose as the person who owns the property, they'll try and dig up whatever information that they can find on Google or something like that. So you want to try and ask questions about things that the owner of the property might not know. And you can ask, hey, who is your closing attorney? Who is your title insurance policy with? Stuff like that will 100% trip them up, but stuff that a client would know or an owner of property would know if they were the ones who actually owned the property. You can ask them for a copy of their settlement statement when they bought the property. I mean, there are a lot of different things you can ask for that would have come through when they bought the property, and you can look and see ask them when they bought the property. A lot of these scammers aren't necessarily going to go down to the very, very last detail. Some will, but most of them are going to get tripped up by a question like that. If you get those questions, ask those questions, get those answered, you're going to see some frustration if you're dealing with a scammer. They get mad, but they don't necessarily get mad because they actually are mad. They get mad because they know if they show frustration or show irritation with somebody, that person might just say, you know what, okay, I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop my efforts to try and figure out who you are. I'm just, okay, don't be offended. Let's just do it. Don't be that person. Make sure you're being vigilant. Tell them why you're doing that. It's to prevent fraud. And if they can't answer your questions to the best of their ability, and they can't answer them accurately, and they're not willing to provide you with the information that you need to feel comfortable that you're in communication with the actual person that owns the property, it's not going to be worth it. It's just not. It's just not. The other thing you can do is if you've got neighboring parcels, even if you're out in the country with big swaths of farmland, thing like that, I'm sure there's an next door neighbor who may know them, who may have at least some idea. Yeah, I saw so-and-so outside around the property, and yeah, they don't live in Florida. They don't live in Chicago, in Illinois. They don't live in New York. They live in North Carolina. They live in Virginia. Another good tool for that is if you see somebody's name, what I do is I will go ahead and look on the North Carolina voter website. Everybody in North Carolina who is registered to vote, you can pull them up and pull their address up on the voter website. So if you go to this North Carolina State Board of Elections, you can pull them up, you can pull up where they live, you can pull up their name, and so you can compare the deed and the address on the deed with the person on the voter website. Now, of course, somebody could have moved in that time period, but you can ask them, hey, where do you live now? And if they can't provide that information, again, that's a pretty good sign that you're not dealing with the actual owner of the property. Do you have any questions on kind of the way that one would work? And what I'll do is I can send out some links also to some of these sites that you can use to double check. All right, so the next one we're dealing with is you've got your fake listing scam. And what this is, it's kind of similar to the for sale not by owner scam, but the difference is they're trying to get you to list their property because that will give them some additional credibility when they're going to sell the property. Because I mean, a property that's listed by a real estate agent is going to be a lot more, there's just going to be a lot more weight behind that as opposed to just a seller who's trying to sell the property. What you can do, what you can do is you can request them to either sign the listing agreement in person, or it'll, at the very least, require them to meet with you virtually, excuse me, on video, Zoom, something like that, or FaceTime even. If they're reluctant to show their face, I would be very hesitant. And that's just because there should be no reason that somebody is unwilling to identify themselves in connection with signing a listing agreement. Yes, they can be signed electronically, but you can just say, hey, this is part of my protocol for making sure that I'm dealing with something, because we've now had the Secret Service in our area sending a report saying that this is happening in our area and you can never be too safe. And like I said on the previous one, if you've got someone who's pushing back against that, I mean, ultimately, you're doing that not only for your protection, but for their protection and for the protection of the buyers. So if you've got people who are unwilling to deal with that, to submit to that, they're almost certainly going to be scamming, because anyone who's legitimately trying to sell their property is not going to be frustrated with those efforts, and they should be willing to meet you in person or at least on video anyway. The other thing I do is suggest doing a market analysis to make sure the purchase price that they want is reasonable. A lot of these folks, they are willing to sell the property considerably under market value, because anything over zero that they get is a win, because the property's not actually theirs. So they're not really losing anything. They're just getting whatever they can get. So if they try and say, oh yeah, it just has to be sold quick, I don't care how little you sell it for. Yeah, they don't care how little you sell it for, because they're not actually losing anything other than the small amount of time it takes to try and work on suckering you in. So I would do a CMA and be like, actually, the purchase price you're looking for should be way higher than this. You were way undervaluing that property. If they insist on selling it at that low value, that's another red flag that it might be a scam. And like I said, look up the same thing as the other, look up the deed, confirm the names and the addresses are accurate. They have some sort of similarity. Same thing with your out-of-state folks. Yes, out-of-state people can own property without any concern, but they should be willing to at least get on a video call with you to confirm who they are. And then I'd also check the MLS to see if the property had potentially been listed previously for a short period of time. Sometimes that'll happen, 2, 3, 4 days. They come up, pops up on MLS, and then the previous agent finds out, oh gosh, I'm being defrauded, and they pull it back off. Make sure you check the MLS before to see if there was any previous listing there. And also, and Margie, thank you for sending me that information, because this is, so Margie actually ran into an issue like this. basically, if there's a company, if there's somebody who says, yeah, this company, I'm with this company who's authorized me to sell the property on behalf of a client, be very wary of that. That's a real estate agency. I mean, they're basically acting as a real estate agent who's then trying to engage another real estate agent to list the property, saying that I'm giving signing authority, especially if the current owner of the property is an individual. I mean, ultimately, those companies are probably companies that don't exist, and they're going to send you documents that don't make sense out of an effort to confuse you. If you ever have any question about anything that you've been sent, feel free to send that over to me. I'm happy to take a look at it for you and let you know, yeah, this is junk. You should just cut off all ties and communication immediately. Does anybody have any comments, questions, anything about this so far? All right. So the next one you see is, and it's very similar to the previous one, this is a fake seller due diligence scam. So what they'll do is, if they're able to get somebody, if they're able to get a buyer under contract and then they obtain due diligence, they'll just cut off complete communication, leave with the due diligence, deposit the check, and then, or if the money's directly deposited into your account. And this is why, number one, I prefer, especially when you're dealing land, maybe a little bit of a lower due diligence threshold if you can do it. And also, if you can make sure, I always suggest delivering due diligence via personal check. That way, a personal check can also always be stopped. Personal check can always be canceled. And if you're delivering that personal check, I would, if there's a listing agent involved, I would deliver it to the listing agent. That way you've taken your responsibility. Hey, I'm the buyer's agent. I'm giving that money to the listing agent. So then you're putting it in their hands so they can give it to their client. Just gives another kind of another safeguard. So if the scam is discovered, a little more time between when that delivery happens and when the client gets it. If they request an electronic transmission, which is an option on the contract, it's an option to deliver due diligence by any sort of electronic means, and that can be wire, that can be Venmo, that could be cryptocurrency if that's what your inclination is. If that's done, just make sure that who's sending the money's being sent to, you confirm that it's actually the person who's on the deed. Because if you've got someone who's saying, oh yeah, I want you to send it to my friend who is willing to receive that due diligence for me, they'll get it to me, I'll sign for it. That's number one, that's not in line with the contract. The contract says that the buyer is to deliver due diligence to the seller, not the buyer is to deliver due diligence to some agent of the seller. Also, like I said, with vacant land, I would consider a bit of a lower due diligence fee, especially if you have any sort of concern as to property ownership, and you can convey that concern to the listing agent, and maybe they'll go back and do their due diligence and do their confirmation. If they want that higher due diligence fee, they're like, no, I can confirm this seller is legit, or they can be like, yeah, I understand why you got there, how you got there. Any questions, anything else on that one? Those last three kind of were similar. I'm going to jump ahead to something a little different. So this is your fake wiring instructions, and we deal with this. We've seen this happen before. It happens in several different ways. And basically what'll happen is you've got somebody who's they're a fraudster, and they'll spoof email addresses of either a listing agent, an attorney, a buyer's agent, and they're sending the buyer wiring instructions, or they're trying to send the attorney wiring instructions. So the buyer will send their cash to close, or the attorney sends their proceeds amount to the fraudster, who then disappears with their money. And typically what they'll do is, as soon as that money hits their account, they'll wire the money overseas. That money is never to be found again. And so we get scared, whatless, by title insurance companies. And this one title insurance company told us, because they're the ones who are out there covering claims, they're the ones who are helping with E&O insurance, things like that. So one title insurance company, they told us about this attorney out of the Triad who got hit once for $75,000. They wired proceeds of $75,000 to a fraud to a fraudster because they didn't verify wiring instructions, but they verified them over the phone, but they got fooled and they took some wiring instructions via regular email when you should really only take them secured or by fax. So after doing that, that same attorney's office, that same paralegal got hit for they got hit for another $300,000 fee. So it's $300,000. It was the other way around. It was a buyer sending $300,000 worth of cash to close to the attorney, and again, they didn't verify wiring instructions appropriately. She didn't verify that they were being sent to the right place, and those funds were gone, and that firm had to shut down because they couldn't cover it. So I mean, there's some real bad stuff that can happen. And I mean, your clients, what can happen is what these fraudsters will do is they'll go and get your email and they'll change it in some really small way. Obviously, some letters are easier than others to change, but L's into ones, I's into ones, S's to fives, things like that. They'll put an extra letter and just try and sneak something in there to make it look like the exact same email as the email that you may have. And then that gets sent over to your client, and then your client will wire funds to that. They'll send wiring instructions to the client. The client won't verify those wiring instructions, or they'll call the number that are on those wiring instructions rather than contacting the law office to verify that they're legitimate. And so if they do that, and that's my concern, some people like to wire the funds from home. If you're wiring from home, they still need to call us and let us know, hey, I want to confirm these numbers. What y'all need to do on your end as real estate professionals is making sure your clients know you will never, ever, 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 under any circumstances, email them wiring instructions or anything of that nature. And I tell folks, put it in your email signature. Let them know that you will never send clients wiring instructions. And if they get wiring instructions from somebody that's you'll know that that's what's going on, that you're being scammed, and make sure you just follow through with that. And also never provide your client with wiring instructions. Those are always going to come from the attorney's office. If you find out that you've been spoofed and that somebody's done that, then I would it's possible that they're accessing your email. They're either accessing your email or they're accessing your client's email. Either way, it's not great. And if your email is being accessed and they know that you're working, especially if it happens more than once to your clients, you're going to want to speak with a technology professional just to get your system looked at to try and get it cleared up. We had an agent that we work with a pretty fair amount who had that happen to her. She had some clients send $13,000 of cash to close funds to a fraudster, and unfortunately they weren't able to get those back because they spoofed her email. And some of these fake wiring instructions realistically should be pretty easy to spot. So these folks put like, we're actually NIP law office doing business as like the Woodlands LLC. Well, yeah, of course we would never do that. No one would ever do that. And that should set off a red flag. But if you've got first-time home buyers, they might have no clue. They've never done it before. And so you're just going to want to make sure that you know that wiring instructions are never going to come from you, and that they're always going to come from the attorney. And if you haven't, and every single time you should call the attorney's office to verify that you have the correct wiring instructions, and have them call our main line or the attorney's main line to do that. Don't call the number on the wiring instructions, call the number on our main line. We have we just say, if you're calling to verify wiring instructions, I think it's hit 3 or something like that. So it's very simple, very quick, and it's a quick process to make sure things are super safe. And also make sure you work with the buyer's attorney that specializes in real estate and knows how to manage that process. The less familiar an attorney's office is with sending out wires, receiving wires, sending wiring instructions securely, the more susceptible your clients are going to be to falling victim to one of these fraudulent transactions. Anybody have any questions about anything of that nature?
No, it's two on the chat.
All right, let me check the chat. One sec. Maybe. Oh, it's way up there. See, what's it doing? I'm working on it. I'm double clicking. Yeah,
Double clicking.
perfect. So how do you secure your email from spoofing or from others getting into your email? The best thing you can do is to not reuse passwords, to use passwords with symbols, numbers, things like that. The easiest way people get in is by you reusing the same password for every single thing you do, which would mean if one of your accounts is compromised, they're going to start going to these fraudsters are going to start going to every single account you may have. So they'll go on they'll try and log into your Amazon account. They'll try to log in to your Netflix account. They'll try and log in everywhere to your bank account. They'll try and log in everywhere they can where you might have secure information to try and pull what they can. And they can also try, because they won't necessarily know what it is that you do or even what your email is and what clients you're communicating with unless they have initial access to your email. Like if they don't have access to your email, they won't be able to know who your buyers are, who your sellers are. But if they gain access to your email, then that's how they can do it. Also, two-factor authentication is another really good way to prevent that. So just when you sign in, I have that on pretty much everything I have. When you sign in when you type in your password, it'll send either a link to your cell phone. So you'll have to click something and that's connected to your email. So once you click that, okay, yeah, I'm good, it'll let you in, or you can type in a password from this authenticator. Google Authenticator is a good one. There are some really simple things you can do to make sure that it's very, very difficult for these folks to get access to your email. Because if they get access to your email, I mean, you're communicating some pretty sensitive information to and from clients. So as you're doing that, if they find out that you're handling a real estate transaction, that makes not necessarily you, but that makes your client a pretty easy target. So Nelly will take your email. If you have Nelly Olivares, I mean, they could just change one of those L's to a 1, and it might be very difficult for somebody to be able to tell the difference between the two. So the best thing you can do is safeguard your email as best you can and change your passwords relatively frequently. So that way, I mean, I know it's a hassle, but when you're dealing with things of the magnitude that y'all are dealing with, I mean, dealing with 5-figure, 6-figure transactions potentially, and letting people know about that, you can never be too safe.
So Margie says, if someone calls and wants you to fraudulently list his property, should you alert the real owner or law enforcement?
I would alert both. I would alert the Attorney General's office and let them know that you've been communicated with respect to that, and relay any sort of information that you have on that. That way you are disclosing that that's happening in your community, and that's going to put them on guard. And that'll also, if another sign pops up in the yard, they'll been able to, like the message that the Secret Service sent out a couple of weeks ago, that will give everybody indication, okay, this is happening in our community. We need to be wary of it. And so I would certainly report it to the Attorney General's office, and you can also report it to the FBI. That's what they're here for. They may not prioritize it, but that's what they're here for. The Attorney General's office, though, they're there to safeguard the interests of the people of North Carolina. And so I would certainly make sure you get in touch with them. All right. Anything else on the wiring instruction piece? All right. So the next one, we all see them. They're the We Buy Your House Quick companies. And what these folks do, and a lot of people don't necessarily know what they do. And I apologize in advance. Like I said, if any of you work for these companies or work for I apologize in advance, but I really don't like it. And I really want to make it clear that while what they do may not necessarily be fraudulent, it can really take advantage of some homeowners that are in a really difficult spot. So what these companies do is they pose as legitimate, we're going to buy your house for cash. If they see that somebody's going through a possible foreclosure, they're going through a bankruptcy, they're elderly, they will go to their home, they'll call them. And I've had this happen to a number of buyers or a number of sellers that we've dealt with, that we have to get something cleared up on this. What they'll do is they'll have them sign a real estate contract that's considerably below market value. The last one I can remember we did was last year. They had a house that was listed for around $250,000. They signed a contract 4 months beforehand, and y'all know what the market was like in 2022. They had them sign a contract for 180 and just say, you know what, we're going to get you out of, the house. This will get your loan paid off. It really wouldn't have gotten their loan paid off. They'd still owed a bunch of closing costs. But once they get them under contract, they'll take it to an attorney or themselves will prepare a memorandum of option contract. And they will record that with the register of deeds in the county the property is located. What that does is that creates a cloud on title that would then need to be released before the property can be sold. And the last one we did, that company demanded $40,000 as a release of their interest in the property before they could sell, before they would release the cloud on title. I mean, and so they've basically got these folks over a barrel, and they're fast talkers. They'll confuse people. They will take advantage of people, and they'll ultimately get them to sign these documents, these contracts. And then even though the contract isn't recorded, the memorandum of the contract is. So when we do a title search, that pops up. We kind of have an idea of what we're dealing with. And so because of that, we then have to basically advise your clients, hey, you're going to have to negotiate with these folks and see what they'd be willing to accept, so you can sell the property for what the property's actually worth, rather than selling them the property for what you have it under contract for. And a lot of times these companies don't necessarily even want to buy the property, even though they'd be getting a good deal. They don't necessarily even have the cash to buy it. So instead, what they'll do is they'll say, oh, you know what? Okay, pay me 25 grand, we'll release it. Well, that's $25,000 more than they would have had otherwise. So again, there's not really out anything other than a couple hours of their time, but that's a lot of what these companies do. Is it illegal? No, but I really don't like it. I think it's pretty shady. And so make sure you ask your clients, especially if they're in a contract or in a circumstance where they're going through a foreclosure. They've recently gone through a bankruptcy. You have elderly buyers who are struggling financially. Then make sure you ask them, have you signed any contracts with anybody? Do you recall anyone coming into your house? A lot of times they may not even remember. It happens in the blink of an eye. So make sure you talk to those folks and let them know. Hey, and ask them, hey, have you had communications with these companies? Also, if you know how to search register of deeds, look up your client's name. See if this is a concern. See if you see any sort of memorandums of contract, or we can do it. Educate possible sellers. If you know that somebody especially is buying a house and they're not the best with money, and you have concerns about whether they're actually going to be able to continue to pay for this house, advise them. If you have any questions about any sort of ability to repay, contact me first. Let me know. We can look and see what your house is worth. That way they're not doing something like this, selling their property for under market value. And ultimately, if you have any concern about whether this exists, request a title search and we'll certainly look into it for you. Or I'll just check the register of deeds for you and let you know if something's on record. Super quick, should be pretty easy. And if something's on there, then you can start that process of negotiating that release before you're under contract. Because once you're under contract with someone else, you're under the gun to not only get this released, but also get the contract closed on the real buy side. And so I will tell you, there's this company that I think it's out of Georgia. who was doing this, and they did it up here in North Carolina, where they offered these folks was like something like $500 or $1,000 to assign them a 3-year listing contract saying you agree that you're going to list your property with our company if you decide to sell your house in the next 3 years. And so they went to sell in the next year or so, and the company said, all right, yep, we'll terminate this listing agreement, which we did record in the Register of Deeds, for $10,000. They had to pay $10,000 to this company for a $500 return. It really is sad, and these were elderly folks they're just taking advantage of. And so just make sure to let your clients know that if you have any concerns about anything, let you know first, because you've got their best interests at heart.
I got a call from one yesterday.
Yeah.
Trying to buy my house.
Yeah, that's what they do.
Yeah.
That's what they
I
do.
drove him out for an hour.
Good.
And then I told him.
Yeah. It's super frustrating.
"Dude,
Every time I see it, it drives me nuts.
Yeah.
It drives me nuts.
Gina has a question.
All right.
She says, how do we differentiate wholesale from for sale not by owner?
So your wholesale, if you can see the contract, then that's going to be more helpful in terms of knowing, because ultimately you're for sale not by owner. Your wholesaler is going to, number one, they're going to know the companies in the area, whereas your for sale not by owner is not necessarily going to know it. There's kind of a standard offer to purchase that your wholesaler also uses. And I always tell folks, I would want to see, and sometimes I'll show it to you, sometimes they won't show it to you, but I would want to see a copy of that A to B contract. And the wholesaler also should be able to tell you the owner of the property, as opposed to and the wholesaler also is generally local.
There's only about 3 in the 3.
Yeah. Yeah. Your wholesaler is almost certainly going to be more local, because it's just more of a localized industry. Whereas a lot of times you're going to see the for sale not by owner be somebody out of Miami, Chicago, New York, somewhere like that. So that they're red flags. And again, meeting the wholesaler in person is the biggest thing you can do, is being willing to meet them in person. And generally speaking, wholesalers are going to be willing to meet you in person because they don't want to own the house. They legitimately do want to sell it, as opposed to these fraudsters. They have no interest in meeting with you in person because they're trying to snow you under. And so, and if you're dealing with a wholesaler, asking them to meet you in person is the best way, or at least have some sort of video call with some sort of confirmation of identity. That's the best way to distinguish between them and the for sale not by owner. Any other questions or anything like that about this? All right, so here's a number of ways that you can sniff people out when they're doing this sort of thing. Look them up in the GIS system and the Register of Deeds. Both of those are very valuable resources. And I'll add to that the voter search tool if you feel like if it seems like the actual owner of the property lives in North Carolina, because you can very quickly identify their address. Pay attention, special attention to out of state and out of county sellers. Them being out of state and out of county doesn't make them illegitimate, or out of state and out of country doesn't make them illegitimate, but it makes it more likely that they're illegitimate, if that makes sense. Pay attention to people saying that they're acting on behalf of the seller. Generally speaking, unless the seller's got a power of attorney that they're willing to present you, this person that's acting on behalf of them is basically practicing real estate without a license. So if they're saying, yeah, I'm this company and they've engaged, no, that's just not something that's permissible, number one. And so they're trying to do your job without being licensed to do so. And also, unless they have specific notarized authority, then they don't have authority that's going to matter anyway. They don't have authority to sign a contract. Ask questions that were relevant to their prior purchase. Who is your closing attorney? Who's your title insurance with? Things of that nature. Who's your next door neighbor? Who owns the property next door? Most people will know that. Request contact information of the notary handling any mail away closing. Mail away closings are unfortunately a part of life. We have to do them. That's just, sometimes people are out of state, sellers are out of state. You've got sellers who travel. And so we have to do mail away closings. However, when we handle mail away closings, we always request contact information of the notary that is handling the mail away closing so that we can contact them and confirm their legitimacy. And so we can double check on the back end to make sure they are a registered notary in the state in which they work. A lot of these scammers they use just fake notary seals, and the notaries that they're actually using are not notaries at all. They've just ordered notary seal, which unfortunately it's easy to do with the internet. Work with an attorney that you trust to handle your transactions. We can spot things that y'all won't necessarily be able to spot through the title process. So we might be able to spot some of those things that would give us some indication that someone's being taken for a ride. And the most important thing I can say is trust your intuition, trust your gut, trust your knowledge. You've been doing it for a long time. You know what it sounds like. You know what it smells like. You want to make sure, even if you haven't, you know what wrong looks like. You know what wrong feels like. And if these people just don't act like they know anything about the property, they don't seem like if they're trying to sell the property for way less than what it's worth, if they're not listening to you, if they're getting confrontational with you, that's a pretty clear indication that they're just trying to snow you under and get something done rather than get the highest and best for their property. So does anybody have any other questions or anything like that based upon what we've gone through?
Yes, Nick, me, Gina.
Yeah.
Do you always create an account with seller or buyers to send them wire instruction like this? We don't have to hear about that. We will escape from that liability if you contact the seller or the buyer directly.
We always communicate directly with the buyer when we send them their closing disclosure. We also send over the wiring instructions so they know where to send it. Now, we always use the same account. Our account doesn't change. So we don't use all these different accounts. All the money goes into our trust account. So that way, if there is some sort of different set of wiring instructions that are sent over, then we know automatically off the jump that, yeah, that's not us. I mean, we use Truist and it ends in 4098. So if we hear anything different, we'll know that it's wrong. And sellers, when they're providing us with wiring instructions, we are very, very cautious as to how we receive those. We will only receive them via, they write them down and have them signed if they're doing a mail away, or from our standpoint, if they are faxed, we can use them, or otherwise I'm only going to take them in person. And I generally speaking, I'm not going to take them after it's closed. And if someone says, I want to check, and then suddenly comes back and says, actually, I want to call in my wiring instructions, we won't do that. Any other questions? Anything else pop to mind? All right. If there's nothing else, then y'all should know how to get in contact with me. But I've got my phone number there. I've got my email. If you have any questions, please let me know. I'd be happy to answer anything that you may have. And yeah, it's spring. Let's go do it. Let's have a good time.
Thank you.
I appreciate y'all.
Thank you so much.
Have a good one, y'all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nick.
You're welcome. Take care. Close it. There we go. Now it's letting me close it.